Angela's story began in a part of the city where life was not easy. The buildings were old, the streets were cracked, and many families were barely making it. Angela herself did not have much. She lived in a small one-room apartment, with peeling paint on the walls and a fridge that was often almost empty. But even though she did not have much money, her heart was always full of kindness. She believed that if she could not give people wealth, she could at least give them care, a warm smile, and a helping hand. One cold evening, after finishing a long day at work, Angela was walking home. She worked at a diner, cleaning tables and washing dishes. Her feet hurt from standing all day, and her hands were dry from soap and water. She wrapped her old coat tighter around her body as the wind blew through the streets. Just as she turned the corner to her apartment building, she noticed something unusual. On the steps of a closed store, 4 children were sitting close together. They looked hungry, tired, and scared. The oldest might have been around 12, while the youngest looked no older than 4. Their clothes were dirty, and they had no blankets to protect them from the cold. Angela stopped in her tracks. She could have walked past them. After all, she barely had enough for herself. But her heart would not let her ignore them. She slowly walked closer and asked gently, "Where are your parents?" The oldest boy shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. He whispered, "We don't have any. They left us." The younger children clung to each other, too afraid to say a word. Angela felt her heart break at the sight. She remembered her own childhood, growing up with very little and feeling what it meant to be invisible. She could not bear to leave them there. Without thinking of how difficult it would be, she said softly, "Come with me. You don't have to sleep out here tonight." The children looked at each other, unsure if they could trust her, but the warmth in her eyes made them believe. Slowly, they stood up and followed her. When they reached her apartment, Angela quickly made space. She only had one small bed and a thin couch, but she spread out blankets on the floor so the children could rest. She opened her fridge and found a small carton of milk, some bread, and a half-used jar of peanut butter. It wasn't much, but she prepared sandwiches and gave them to the children. They ate as if they hadn't eaten in days. Watching them eat brought tears to Angela's eyes. She whispered to herself, "Lord, give me the strength to take care of them." That night, as the children slept on the floor, Angela lay awake. She thought about what she had just done. She was already struggling with bills and rent. How could she feed 4 extra mouths? How would she afford school clothes or doctor visits? For a moment, fear filled her heart. But then she remembered how the youngest child had held her hand tightly as they walked in, afraid but hopeful. Angela knew she had made the right choice. Even if it meant working harder, she would not let these children go back to the streets. The next morning, she woke up early, long before sunrise. She went to her job at the diner, working twice as hard. During her short breaks, she thought about the children waiting at home. She started picking up extra shifts, cleaning houses on weekends and doing laundry for neighbors to earn a few more dollars. Her body grew tired, but her spirit stayed strong. Every time she came home and saw the children smiling, every time she heard them say "Thank you, Mama Angela," she felt her heart grow lighter. In the neighborhood, people began to notice. Some admired her, whispering, "She has such a big heart." Others criticized, saying, "She can't even care for herself. What is she doing with 4 children?" Angela heard their comments, but she didn't let them bother her. She believed that kindness was not measured by how much money you had but by how much love you could give. The children slowly started to feel safe. At first, they had nightmares, waking up crying from memories of being abandoned. Angela would sit by their side, rubbing their backs and whispering, "You're safe now. I'm here." She enrolled them in school, even though it meant wearing her old shoes so she could buy them notebooks. She taught them simple things like how to say grace before eating, how to respect others, and how to believe in themselves. She wanted them to know that they were not just poor children with no home, they were loved, and they had a future. Years began to pass. The children grew healthier, happier, and stronger. Angela celebrated their small victories, like when one of them brought home a good grade or when the youngest learned to read her first book. On birthdays, even when she had no money for gifts, she baked a small cake using flour, sugar, and love. The children would cheer, their laughter filling the little apartment. For Angela, those moments were priceless. Still, there were days when life tested her. Some nights, she had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries. She often ate less so the children could eat more. But she never complained. She carried her struggles in silence, always showing the children a strong face. "We are a family," she would say. "And families don't give up on each other." Angela's sacrifice did not go unnoticed by the children. Even at a young age, they understood how much she was giving up for them. The oldest boy, James, often tried to help by working odd jobs after school. The second child, a girl named Maya, would help cook and clean. The younger two, Daniel and Rose, tried to make her laugh with silly jokes when they noticed she looked tired. Slowly, the bond between them grew deeper, stronger than blood. One evening, as the sun set, Angela sat on the porch with the four children. They looked out at the world beyond their neighborhood. One day, she told them, "You will grow up and do something great. Don't let where you come from stop you. Remember that you are loved, and you are worth it." Her voice was soft but full of hope. The children nodded, holding on to her words like a promise. What Angela did that night when she opened her door to four homeless children was not just an act of kindness. It was a turning point, though she didn't know it yet. She thought she was only saving them, but in truth, they would one day save her in a way she could never imagine. Her story had just begun, and though many challenges lay ahead, Angela's heart was strong enough to carry them all. Angela's life became a daily battle of strength, sacrifice, and hope. Taking in four children was never part of her plan, yet it became her greatest mission. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, slipping quietly out of her small apartment while the children were still asleep. She would look at their peaceful faces for a moment before closing the door behind her, whispering to herself, "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." At the diner where she worked, she spent long hours on her feet. She cleaned tables, carried heavy trays, and scrubbed the kitchen floors until her hands ached. But even when she was exhausted, Angela never allowed herself to slow down. She knew that the children were counting on her. She would come home late at night with sore muscles, but the moment the children ran to hug her, her pain seemed to fade. The oldest boy, James, started to take on responsibility as he grew older. He walked his younger siblings to school, helped them with homework, and made sure they stayed out of trouble. Angela often told him, "You are strong, but remember, you are still a child too. Let me carry the heavy burdens." But James admired her so much that he wanted to help in any way he could. He wanted to be her protector, even though she was the one protecting them all. Despite her sacrifices, life did not get easier. Bills piled up on the small table in her apartment. Rent notices arrived often, reminding her that she was always just one step away from losing everything. On some nights, the lights went out because she couldn't pay the electric bill on time. On other nights, the refrigerator hummed softly but remained nearly empty. Angela would pretend she wasn't hungry, pushing her plate toward the children and saying, "I ate at work." But the children knew the truth. They saw how thin she was becoming, how tired her eyes looked. Still, Angela's love was stronger than her hunger or her exhaustion. She taught the children lessons they would never forget. She told them that kindness was more powerful than anger, that hard work was more valuable than shortcuts, and that love could carry them through even the darkest times. When the children cried over missing their parents, Angela reminded them gently, sometimes family is not about blood. Sometimes it's about who stands with you when no one else will. Those words gave them comfort, and slowly, they began to believe they were no longer abandoned. They had a mother in her. But just as life was starting to feel stable, fate tested Angela in a way she never imagined. One evening, after finishing her late shift at the diner, she was walking home through the dimly lit streets. She had taken this path many times before, but that night something unexpected happened. Just a block away from her apartment, a robbery took place at a small corner store. She didn't know the robbers. She wasn't involved. She only happened to be walking by when the sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived quickly, surrounding the area. Confusion spread everywhere. People ran in different directions, and Angela was caught in the middle of the chaos. The store owner, bleeding and frightened, pointed out the nearest person he saw Angela. She tried to explain she was just coming from work, that she knew nothing about the crime, but the officers didn't listen. They handcuffed her on the spot. Neighbors watched in silence, too afraid to speak up. Back at the apartment, the children waited for Angela to return. Hours passed, and they grew worried. Finally, the news reached them: Angela had been arrested. Their world fell apart in an instant. James tried to comfort his younger siblings, telling them, she didn't do anything. They'll let her go. But days turned into weeks, and then into months. Angela's trial was harsh and unfair. She didn't have enough money for a good lawyer, so she was given one who barely fought for her. Witnesses were confused, evidence was weak, but the courtroom seemed determined to paint her as guilty. The children sat in the back row, their small hands clutching each other tightly, praying that the truth would come out. Angela looked at them with tear-filled eyes, mouthing, "Be strong," as the verdict was read. When the judge announced life in prison, the children cried out in disbelief. The courtroom felt cold and unforgiving. Angela's heart broke, not for herself, but for the children she had saved. She feared they would be sent back to the streets, lost and alone again. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, that she had done nothing wrong, but her voice was drowned by the sound of the gavel hitting the desk. As the guards led her away, Angela turned to her children one last time. She pressed her hands against her chest, signaling love, as they sobbed in the courtroom. That image stayed with them for years: their mother, their savior, being taken away in chains. Life inside prison was hard for Angela. The walls were cold, the days were long, and the nights were filled with loneliness. But she never gave up hope. She wrote letters to the children whenever she could, filling the pages with encouragement. Stay in school. Be good to each other. Don't let anger live in your hearts. I believe in you. Those letters became treasures for the children, proof that their mother's love could not be locked away. Meanwhile, outside those prison walls, the children struggled to hold their lives together. At first, they felt broken, lost without her guidance. But as they grew older, they remembered the lessons Angela had taught them. They remembered her sacrifices, the nights she went hungry so they could eat, the mornings she woke up before dawn to provide for them. Slowly, her strength became their strength. James worked hard in school, determined to prove that her sacrifices were not wasted. Maya found comfort in caring for others, inspired by Angela's kindness. Daniel and Rose followed their older siblings' example, determined to make their mama Angela proud. Though life was difficult, though they missed her every single day, they carried her love in their hearts. Angela often sat in her prison cell, staring out of the small window, imagining the children's faces. She prayed that one day they would find a way to live better lives than she had. She never stopped believing in them, even when she no longer believed in freedom for herself. She thought her story was over, that the world had forgotten her. But she didn't know then that the children she had once rescued would one day dedicate their lives to rescuing her. Her greatest fear had come true: she was separated from them. But her greatest hope still lived: the lessons she planted in their hearts were growing. She didn't know it yet, but those children were becoming strong, brave, and determined. One day, they would return not as helpless kids but as powerful adults ready to fight for justice. Years moved slowly for Angela inside prison, but for the children she had raised, time brought both pain and growth. The four of them, once small and frightened, began to step into adulthood. They carried the weight of their mother's absence, but they also carried her love and teachings deep in their hearts. Every decision they made, every challenge they faced, they asked themselves one question: what would Mama Angela want me to do? James, the oldest, felt the pressure more than anyone. He remembered being 12 years old, sitting in that courtroom and watching his mother be taken away. That memory burned in his mind and fueled his determination. He studied harder than anyone else in his class, pushing himself through high school with excellent grades. Teachers often asked why he worked so hard, and he would answer simply, "Because my mom believed in me." His dream was clear: he wanted to become a lawyer, not just to honor Angela, but to one day fight for her freedom. Maya, the second child, had grown into a thoughtful and compassionate young woman. She remembered Angela's gentle words on nights when they cried about being abandoned. "Family is who stands with you." Those words shaped her path. She decided to become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children who were just like she once was: lost, scared, and forgotten by the world. Every child she helped reminded her of Angela's sacrifice, and she often whispered to herself, "I'm doing this because of you, Mama." Daniel, the third child, once shy and quiet, found his voice as he grew older. He had always been the one to make Angela laugh with silly jokes when she was tired. Now, he used his voice in a bigger way. He became a teacher, standing in front of classrooms filled with young faces who looked up to him. He told his students stories about strength, hope, and never giving up. He didn't tell them the full story of his own childhood, but everything he taught was rooted in the lessons Angela had given him. Rose, the youngest, carried the deepest memories of Angela's tender care. She had been just 4 years old when Angela took her in, and although her memories of those early days were blurry, the warmth of Angela's arms never left her. As she grew, she developed a passion for truth and justice. She became a journalist, telling stories of people who were overlooked or mistreated. In every article she wrote, she thought of Angela, the woman whose story had been silenced. Though their paths were different, the bond between the four of them remained unshakable. They met often, sometimes around a simple kitchen table, sometimes on the steps of the courthouse where they once cried together. They spoke about their lives, their careers, and always about Angela. No matter how many years passed, her absence was a wound that never healed. But instead of letting that wound destroy them, they used it to push forward. James often said, "One day, I'll prove she's innocent." Maya would add, "We'll do it together." Daniel would remind them, "She gave us everything. We can't stop until she's free." Rose, with her sharp eyes and determined voice, would declare, "The world will know her story. They can't ignore her forever." Angela, in her prison cell, had no idea of the promises her children were making outside. She only knew that life behind bars was lonely and unfair. But even in the darkest nights, she held on to hope because of the letters she received. The children never forgot to write. They sent her pictures of graduations, birthdays, and holidays. In each letter, they told her how much they loved her and how much they owed her. Angela would sit on her narrow bunk, holding those letters close to her chest, whispering prayers of gratitude. As the children grew into adults, they began to see clearly the mistakes that had been made in Angela's case. James, now in law school, studied every detail of her trial. He read the transcripts, analyzed the evidence, and grew more convinced that Angela had been wrongfully convicted. He told his siblings, her lawyer didn't fight for her. The evidence was weak. This was never justice. His words ignited a fire in all of them. Maya used her work as a social worker to connect with community leaders and activists who believed in second chances and fighting injustice. Daniel inspired his students with stories of resilience, and some of them even joined protests later in their lives because of the values he taught them. Rose began to publish articles about wrongful convictions, slowly drawing attention to cases like Angela's. Though she didn't always mention her mother by name at first, every story she told was a step closer to shining a light on Angela's situation. The years stretched into decades, but the 4 children never wavered. They carried their mother's dream like a torch, passing it between them when one of them grew tired. Together, they reminded each other that Angela had once saved them when no one else would. Now it was their turn to save her. Even when life tested them with personal struggles, jobs lost, bills unpaid, relationships broken, they always came back to the same promise. We can't stop. Not until she's home. Angela, inside prison, grew older. Her hair turned gray, her hands became weaker, but her spirit remained strong. She often told other inmates stories about her children. "They're good kids," she would say proudly. "They're out there making a difference. They'll do big things one day." She didn't know that those big things would one day include fighting for her very freedom. In quiet moments, she would close her eyes and imagine them as children again, running around her small apartment, laughing, and calling her Mama Angela. She missed those days deeply, but she also trusted that everything she had poured into them was still alive. She had planted seeds of love and resilience, and now those seeds had grown into strong trees that would not break. The 4 of them carried her in every step they took. They didn't just build careers, they built lives that reflected her sacrifices. They became living proof that one act of kindness could change the course of many lives. And slowly, they began to understand that their purpose was bigger than themselves. One evening, as they sat together discussing their mother's case, James looked at his siblings with determination in his eyes. "It's time," he said firmly. "We've been preparing all these years. Now we fight for her with everything we have." The others nodded. Their hearts beat with the same rhythm. It was no longer just a dream. It was their mission. Angela had once saved them from the cold streets when no one else would. Now, as adults, they were ready to walk back into the fire of injustice to save her. They had grown up, they had become strong, and they were no longer just children. They were warriors armed with education, determination, and most importantly, the love Angela had given them. The fight was about to begin, and none of them intended to stop until their mother was free. The decision had been made. After years of quietly building their lives and carrying the lessons Angela gave them, the 4 children were ready to stand together and fight for her freedom. They were no longer kids who once cried in the courtroom. They were now grown adults with skills, determination, and a fire that would not burn out. Each of them carried a piece of the plan, and together, they became unstoppable. James, who had finally become a lawyer, took the lead in the legal side of things. He spent endless nights digging through the old case files. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and dusty records, he read every word of the transcripts from Angela's trial. The more he read, the angrier he became. The evidence used against her was weak. The witnesses had been uncertain. The lawyer assigned to her case had not fought hard. This was never justice, he muttered to himself as he highlighted line after line of errors. He began drafting appeals, determined to reopen her case. Maya, with her years of experience as a social worker, took charge of gathering support from the community. She had built relationships with activists, local leaders, and organizations that believed in second chances and justice reform. She started telling Angela's story to them, not just as a case number, but as a woman who had saved 4 children and then lost her freedom for something she never did. "She is not just my mother," Maya would say with emotion in her voice, She is the reason we are standing here today. She deserves justice. Her words moved many hearts, and slowly, people began to join the cause. Daniel, the teacher, believed that education and awareness were powerful tools. He spoke to his students about the importance of fairness and truth. Some of his older students were so inspired that they volunteered to help spread Angela's story. Daniel organized small events in libraries, schools, and community centers, sharing not only what had happened to Angela but also the importance of fighting injustice wherever it appeared. This is not just about one woman, he would tell the crowd, this is about making sure no innocent person is forgotten. Rose, the journalist, used her pen like a sword. She began writing articles, first in local newspapers and then in larger platforms. She told Angela's story with detail and heart, making people see not just the label of prisoner but the human being who had given her life to save 4 children. Her words painted Angela as the loving mother who had sacrificed everything, only to be punished for something she did not do. Soon, her articles spread across the city, and then across the country. More and more people started asking, who is this woman? Why is she still behind bars? Together, the 4 of them worked like a team that could not be broken. They met every week, sometimes at James's small office, sometimes at Maya's living room table. They spread out papers, petitions, and ideas, planning their next moves. There were moments of frustration when doors were slammed in their faces, when appeals were denied, when people said it was impossible. But every time one of them felt discouraged, another reminded them, Mama Angela never gave up on us. We can't give up on her. Slowly, their efforts began to create ripples. Community members who had once stayed silent started speaking up. People remembered Angela's kindness, how she had always been the woman who helped others even when she had nothing. Some old neighbors shared stories of her sacrifices, of how she worked 2 jobs to feed children who were not even her own. These voices added power to the movement. Maya organized marches where people carried signs with Angela's name on them. Crowds filled the streets, chanting for justice. Daniel's students created banners, writing powerful words like Free Angela and Justice Delayed is Justice Denied. Rose's articles were shared online, reaching strangers in faraway cities who began to write letters of support. James filed motion after motion, sending appeals to higher courts, refusing to let the case be forgotten. Inside prison, Angela began to notice changes. Letters started arriving from people she didn't even know, students, activists, even strangers from across the country. They wrote things like, "We believe in you, and we are fighting for you." For the first time in years, Angela felt that the world had not completely forgotten her. She held those letters close, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "My children are doing this." The fight was not easy. For every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. Judges dismissed appeals, lawyers from the other side tried to argue against reopening the case, and critics said they were wasting their time. But the 4 of them had inherited Angela's stubborn strength. They refused to quit. They kept telling her story louder, stronger, and with more evidence to back it up. James finally discovered a key piece of information that had been overlooked during the original trial. A witness had given conflicting statements, and some evidence had been mishandled. It wasn't enough to immediately free Angela, but it was enough to demand that her case be reviewed again. He brought it to his siblings with excitement, and they all felt hope like they hadn't in years. "This is it," James said firmly. "This is what we've been waiting for." Maya arranged for lawyers and activists to back the new motion. Daniel gathered signatures from thousands of people demanding justice. Rose wrote the most powerful article of her career, sharing the new evidence and calling out the injustice of Angela's imprisonment. The article spread widely, capturing the attention of major news outlets. Soon, Angela's name was being spoken on television, on the radio, and across social media. She was no longer just another forgotten prisoner, she had become a symbol of wrongful conviction. The four of them knew that this was their moment. They pushed harder than ever before, speaking at rallies, attending hearings, and knocking on every door they could find. They were no longer just fighting as her children, they were fighting as professionals, as voices of truth, and as a family united by love. Angela, sitting in her cell, heard from the guards that her story was all over the news. Some even told her, "Your kids are making history out there." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears. She had once saved them from the streets, and now they were saving her from a life sentence. The battle was reaching its peak. After nearly 2 decades of waiting, struggling, and hoping, the four children had built enough momentum to bring Angela's case to the highest court. The air was heavy with anticipation. They didn't know if the judges would listen, but they knew they had given everything they had. They were ready to stand in that courtroom, not as scared children anymore, but as strong adults, determined to bring their mother home. And in that moment, Angela's story was no longer just about injustice. It was about love coming full circle. The day finally arrived when Angela's case was brought before the highest court. For 20 long years she had lived behind prison walls, waiting, praying, and holding on to hope that one day the truth would come out. And now, the children she had once rescued were standing tall, no longer the little ones who had clung to her dress in fear, but strong men and women determined to give her back her life. That morning, the courthouse was filled with people. Supporters, activists, journalists, and community members all gathered to witness the hearing. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and signs of support were held outside by those who had marched for Angela's freedom. At the front of the room sat James, Maya, Daniel, and Rose, their hands clasped together tightly. They had dreamed of this day for years, and now it was real. Angela was brought into the courtroom, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the marks of time, but her spirit still shining through her tired eyes. When she saw her children sitting in the front row, she smiled, tears immediately filling her eyes. For 2 decades she had seen them only through glass windows or in short prison visits. Now she was seeing them here, fighting for her, and her heart swelled with pride. The judges entered, and the hearing began. James stood and spoke with the strength of a man who had been preparing for this moment his whole life. He presented the evidence, showing how the original trial had failed, how witnesses had given uncertain testimonies, and how important facts had been ignored. His voice did not shake, it carried the weight of both truth and love. He wasn't just a lawyer fighting for a case, he was a son fighting for his mother. Maya stood next, speaking not as a lawyer but as a daughter and a social worker. She spoke about Angela's life, about how she had taken in 4 children who had no one, and raised them with love and discipline. "She didn't just save us," Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion, "she built us into the people we are today. Without her, none of us would be standing here. She gave us a future when we had none. And for that, she lost her own future. That is not justice. That is cruelty." Her words moved many in the courtroom to tears. Daniel spoke about the impact Angela had not only on their lives but on the lives of many others. He told the judges about the values she instilled in them, values he now passed on to his students every day. "Angela taught us to stand up for what is right, to fight for the truth, and to never give up. If she could plant those lessons in us while struggling to survive, imagine what she could give to the world if she were free." Rose finished with a powerful statement, reading letters from people across the country who had been touched by Angela's story. She spoke of the community rallies, the thousands of signatures demanding justice, and the articles that had brought national attention to the case. "She is no longer just our mother," Rose said firmly, "she is a symbol of hope for every person who has been wronged. Freeing Angela is not only about correcting a mistake, it is about showing the world that truth still matters." The courtroom fell silent as the judges retreated to make their decision. Minutes felt like hours. Angela sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her heart racing. She looked at her children, each of them grown and strong, and whispered softly, "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Finally, the judges returned. The lead judge spoke clearly, his voice steady. He announced that after reviewing the evidence, it was clear that Angela's conviction had been a miscarriage of justice. The court declared her innocent. Her life sentence was overturned. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then it erupted in cheers, tears, and applause. Supporters hugged each other, reporters rushed to capture the moment, and the four children leapt to their feet. They rushed forward, tears streaming down their faces, as Angela was unshackled and declared free. Angela stood trembling, her legs weak from shock. The first arms that wrapped around her were James's. He held her tightly, whispering, "We did it, Mama. We brought you home." Maya joined, her tears falling onto Angela's shoulder. Daniel and Rose wrapped around them, and together they formed the same circle of love they had built 20 years ago in that tiny apartment. Only now, it was stronger than ever. Walking out of the courthouse, Angela felt the sun on her face like it was the first time she had felt it in years. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath of freedom, her children standing proudly by her side. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, but all Angela could hear were the voices of her children calling her Mama. She whispered back to them, her voice shaking, "It was all worth it." The world celebrated her release, but for Angela, the true celebration was in the quiet moments that followed. She sat at a dinner table with her children that night, eating a meal that wasn't prison food, surrounded by laughter and warmth. She listened as they told her about their lives, James as a lawyer, Maya as a social worker, Daniel as a teacher, and Rose as a journalist. She realized that the seeds she had planted in love had grown into something beautiful, something that could not be destroyed by prison walls. Angela had once saved 4 children from the cold streets. She had given them love, safety, and a future. In return, they had given her back her life. The circle of kindness had come back to her in the most powerful way. As the night ended, Angela looked at her children and said softly, "Family is not about blood. It is about who stands with you when no one else will. And you stood with me." The children smiled, holding her hands tightly. Her story became a light to others. It was told in classrooms, in newspapers, in community centers, and on television. People spoke of the woman who had once been poor and struggling, who had given everything to children who were not her own, and who was later freed by their love. Angela's story showed that kindness does not die, that love does not fade, and that justice, though delayed, can still triumph. And so, after 20 years of waiting, Angela walked free, surrounded not by despair but by the living proof of her sacrifice, the 4 children she had once rescued, who had now rescued her. The world saw her as a symbol, but to them, she was simply Mama Angela, the woman whose love had saved them all.